live? Micholi, we live? We're live? Oh, we're good. We're good. We're live, everybody. What's going on? Just throw it out there Thursday, and I am pumped because it's my Friday and I have to come in tomorrow. But in order to talk about what we're going to talk about today, we're going to be talking about shock failures, okay? Why do they happen? What can you do to prevent them? And, yeah. Justin Smith, what do you have to say about that?
I would love to talk about shock failures. Thank you very much, Steve. Because we see all kinds of stuff that comes through the shop, you guys. We got guys that send cars for 150-foot jumps and just wreck it, and then we get the shocks off that. We got guys that roll cars, and we've got broken shocks from that. We've got guys that just they never drive very fast, but maybe they're in Florida and they've got a lot of salty mud on the shaft, and all that does is just completely pit it, causing the thing to blow seals and other things like that. So there's a lot of different things that add up to shock failure, right? We want to point out a few of those so that you understand what causes them, how that works on the inside of the shock. When you end up pulling the shaft out, what actually happens and why. And maybe hopefully you guys can prevent some of that stuff from happening to you in the future. If you've got any questions as to why something happened, if you've had it happen to you, then please ask on the feed, and the guys will let me know what that is, and we'll answer it for you. Otherwise, I'm just going to jump into a couple of the most common ones that we see, and one of the reasons why we kind of invented the limit strap package for UTVs to try and prevent a lot of that. So if you come over to the bench, we've got a couple of shocks that are cut apart. Here's a internal bypass box, and you can see we've got the outside of the body, we've got the bypass tube on the inside. Piston, this is the retainer nut on the top of the shaft, some valving, and extension spring. So this is called a top-out spring. So when this whole thing gets pulled all the way out, which we've got a strap on it, keeping me from pulling it all the way. But when you jump the car, you go over rock crawling and the tire falls off the backside of the next rock, or you're transferring from one dune to the next and the first tire off that lip falls all the way out. That's full extension, tires in the air. Or if you jump it and you're in the air, tire full extension, then what happens is this assembly pulls all the way out. It compresses this top out spring, and then it's a solid hit basically between the seal cap and the bottom out washer underneath the piston. So with this spring completely compressed, that's a solid metal extension. That's what you hear when you have an extension clunk, basically, that everybody talks about. This is the inside of a Walker Evans shock. Same functionality, right? We've got, but without bypass, piston, bottom out washer. This is the, instead of extension or top out springs, Walker uses a hydraulic extension stop. So on the inside of this cup, it's kind of fitted exactly the same size as this extension in the seal head. So when this pulls all the way out, actually I'm going to probably have one of you guys pull the strap off this if you would. Never mind, bolt's loose. So with the strap removed, you can see what happens when this goes all the way out full extension. That's metal on metal. After it slows down slightly on this hydraulic extension stop, this slows the speed down, but it doesn't slow it down enough to keep it from having clunk. Extension clunk is caused by a few things. One, if you change the wheel and tire package from stock weights of the stock wheel and tire to any other aftermarket wheel and tire package, it's probably going to be heavier, which more weight on that unsprung weight as the tire is extending as you get into the air. That's more weight pulling on that shock system, which pulls it right through that hydraulic zone, and you get extension clunk because of the weight hanging on it. There's nothing else stopping that suspension from going all the way to full droop except for the shock itself. So a little bit extra weight. If the valving was changed, where the internal valving on the rebound side was sped up, which means that as you're going through some whoops, the extension speed is controlled by the rebound stack on top of the piston. So if you factory, it was fairly slow, but it would ride better, for instance, if you sped that up so it came out quicker. Well, that gives this whole thing a little bit of a head start in speed, so that clunk increases. So rebound valving can affect extension clunk. Weight of the wheel and tire definitely affects extension clunk. Weight of the brakes, hub, bearing assembly, anything that's moving, if you put a little bit more weight on that, it's going to change it. A little bit more weight on the inside of this sprung system means that that spring needs to be stiffer to be able to slow this down if it's holding up more weight. So you overspeed this spring with more weight, and this comes down to a solid clunk. That extension clunk, what it does, eventually, the only thing stopping it from pulling the shaft all the way out is that nut. So that nut, over a period of time and a lot of weight, can snap the shaft right off, basically making it a two-piece shaft, or it can strip the nut, and you'll see that in two ways. I've got a shaft I can show you that has that. This one, you can see where the nut actually stripped off of those threads. So if these threads were perfectly clean and there was no problem with them, that means the nut that was put on here wasn't torqued properly, or maybe it was loose or not enough thread Loctite when it's put together and it unthreaded itself, which would be from an assembly problem. But typically this nut will strip right off, or that whole piece of the shaft just snaps right off at the end, leaves the nut with the shaft in it and the piston and all the valving inside the shock. And then the shaft exits the shock and you got a two-piece shock sitting there, and you're not going anywhere when you're driving your car like that. Here's a nut that's actually had that happen. So here's a shaft, normal threads. Here's the nut that goes on there. But take a look at this one. It actually has the shaft still in it where it snapped it off. That's just from pulling this right off. All the weight, valving, other things that cause that. Mitch or Dom, Steve, anything you want to add to the extension speed?
Negative. There's still people joining, but there's 2 random questions.
Oh, sure.
Do we sell shock temperature stickers?
We don't have any on the website, but if you email us, I'll give you a link.
Also, does heat degrade oil over time?
Yes. Heat and cavitation are the 2 biggest enemies of shock oil. Typically, if you get the shock oil too hot, it's going to get thinner. It's going to break down. The vehicle is going to ride softer. It's going to bottom out more. But another thing that happens when the shock overtemps or oil overtemps is it actually gets stiffer in the small chop because the nitrogen pressure goes through the roof. 200 pounds nitrogen pressure at, say, 300 degrees shock temp might turn into 1,200 pounds of nitrogen pressure. And when you have that much pressure in there, then the little stuff really, really hurts. But as soon as you hit something big, it blows right through it because the oil's too thin. Shock temps. Running temperature should be somewhere in the 150 to 250 range. If you get over the 250, 275, 280, as you approach, most shock oils are going to break down over 250. The good race oils won't. What will happen is, though, what will happen is that the shock will continue to get hot. As soon as you approach 300 degrees, then what happens is the Loctite that's holding this body threaded into this cap melts. When the Loctite melts, then the body and the cap can unthread while it's on the vehicle, and now all of a sudden you got no shock and oil everywhere. So temperature is a big problem. Eventually it becomes such a problem that parts fall off. But before that, it's going to ride like crap. Yes, Mitch.
Another random question. Any movement on Segway springs?
Is the question, do we have spring kits? Is that what that is?
Do springs on a Segway.
What's that?
Are we going to do spring kits on a Segway?
Yeah, so Mitch, I think you've got your kit already done for that, don't you?
We're still designing a couple pieces to make it work, but yes, we are making some headway on it. I don't know a time frame on when we're going to have them, but we will have them.
What are the parts trying to convert metric shock parts to standard spring?
Yep, so some crossovers, spring adapters, and retainers to make it work. So some cool trick stuff coming for that. So,
All right.
yes,
So,
we are
about how
working on
long, Mitch? 2 weeks?
it. No time frame, but it is being worked on.
Always 2 weeks. All right, thanks. Other component failures. I've got a little bit of a list over there, so if you guys want me to talk about anything special, then I will. But for now, here's a shock fork on the bottom of a Pro R in the front. Most people by now know that there is a little bit of a weak spot when it comes to the shaft mating up with that. Pull this one out. So when that's threaded in, and typically if you drive a Pro R pretty hard, you're not going to see this problem. But if you stuff it into something and you get some sort of arm flex on the chassis, lower arm inside the bushing, some movement that way, then this can get a little bit of a load sideways, and it leaves that threaded portion inside the fork.
Or if you break a ball joint.
Yeah, if you break a ball joint, then again, it's going to try and move all the parts, the lower arm, upper arm, everything starts moving, and that's when it gets side load on this. Typically, using it normally doesn't cause this. But if you have anything go wrong, then this is an immediate issue that you run into. So to fix that, we've got billet lower shock forks. And the way that's fixed, if you take a look down in there, that threaded portion ends where the stock one does. This portion of the fork comes up and grabs and supports the actual shaft itself. Comes up a ways, supporting the shaft, so now it can't move left and right. There's no side load possible at the bottom because it's supported. So this is an instant cure for that. Forks are sold in pairs. Pretty straightforward stuff. You can actually install it at home if you're a decent mechanic. Also, we have lower spring perch. The reason for the lower spring perch is not really because the factory spring perches break, which they do, and we have seen guys that land it from too big of a jump and the factory perch has got a slot in it. It spreads out and blows right off the bottom. This one does not, but the reason that it's two pieces is because when this is installed on top of our fork, if I can get it on there, and tightened, that puts this whole lower sleeve into a press fit. So now it's not just a little bit snug and tight on the shaft, it's actually pressed around the shaft. And as Steve will tell you, he loves a tight fit when it comes to the shaft on a Pro R, right, Steve?
Oh, don't I?
Okay, that's what I thought. So, shaft failures, we've got pulling the shaft out of the shock, mostly because of tire weight, wheel weight, rebound speed. The cures for those things are all limit strap. If you throw a ton of valving at it, you can slow the rebound down, but it's going to slow down so much that the car's going to ride like crap. It won't go through the whoops. It's going to actually break other parts because the tire's off the ground. Maybe you'll break your parts because you turn the wheel in the whoops and you don't make the corner and you lose it and go down the cliff or something like that. So too much rebound causes other issues. Limit straps allow you to run any of the shock settings that are best for your terrain and driving and not have any extension clunk, which then causes failure. So limit strap cures that. Mitch, you had something good.
So I got a comment first. Love these comments. Steve Pesci said, thanks for getting my Pro R set up with all the goodies at Glamis during Thanksgiving. Car was absolutely amazing. A+.
A+, I love that. Thanks,
And then question, what are the requirements to get sponsored?
Oh, as in like race team sponsor stuff? Pretty straightforward, man. All you got to do is send us your race resume to Jessica, right, Dom? To you, okay. Send it to Dominic, so dom@shocktherapist.com, and he's looking at me. He's all pissed off at me now that he's gonna have to read through all these resumes. But
You better win.
you have to send your race resume with a media plan as to how you're gonna advertise yourself and us, and it certainly helps if you've won something. But if you're just starting out, you're probably not gonna get anything out of Dom. He's pretty tight with that stuff. Mitch.
Steve, do we sell new spring perches for the Turbo S?
We sure do. They're on the website, www.shocktherapyusa.com.
Do you have a side gig as a lawyer, fine print announcer?
You'll hear me on the radio sometimes. Justin, I do have a question. Not you, Dom. Notorious Shane wants to know, dual rate springs ever available in black by chance? ? No.
No, they're,
Real
no,
simple,
they're not.
no.
No, they're not. The joke around here is you can get any color you want as long as it's silver. The reason for that is that we trust our powder coater to do a good job, and he's not going to run the spring powder coating at too high of a temperature in the oven. He's not going to strip the powder coat with flame like a torch or another device. Anything that overheats the spring is going to ruin the rate, and a lot of powder coaters don't do a good job with that. So we do not warranty the spring ever if somebody's powder coated it because we don't know who did it and we don't know the process. Also, it doesn't have our name or part number on it, so guess what? We don't even know if it's ours. So anytime you do any powder coating to the springs, it's not warranted, number one. Number two, you can do it. We do it all the time. These are powder coated to begin with, so you can do it. You just have to do it right, and you have to have the right guy do it. But you still, even if you have the right guy, you're going to lose a warranty from us. Cool? Yeah, good enough. All right. What's next on the list of explosions on shop? Oh,
How about that?
yeah. There's a picture that we had in our ad. We had a lot of people call and ask us about that. How does that even happen, right? Well, what that is the body on a Walker Evans shock actually split. And this picture is the shock upside down. So it would be like that with the preload nut right about here, so a split right about there. The only way that happens is from overpressurization. Overpressurization on the inside of a shock happens when the shaft speed is too fast, meaning you hit something so hard and so big that the shaft completely compressed inside that shock faster than it ever would in any normal application. As the shaft moves in, pressures go up. Also, if you look on the inside of the shock, you'll see when this shaft gets up to the bump zone, right when this piston and shaft go into this needle zone, this system gets stiffer because it chokes off the oil flow to where it's only around the piston. And Steve is making me laugh over in the corner because he can't help himself. But once this piston gets into this zone and the pressures go through the roof, it's slowing you down, keeping you from hitting the bottoming the car out. But if somebody who valved the shock throws too much metal at it, which is basically valving, and made it too stiff and choked the flow or changed the piston to a lower flowing piston design, then it can over pressurize that shock in this zone and blow the body right out of it. That one right there was over pressurized. Two things: landed from a pretty good jump, and second, had way too much valving in it. How much pressure does it require? Most shocks are tested to 3,000 to 4,000 psi. Foxes are tested to 5,000 psi. So you would have to go past 5,000 psi to blow up a Fox. You'd probably have to go past 3,000 to 4,000 psi to blow up a Walker. Aluminum body versus steel body, a whole bunch of other factors. Wall thickness and stuff too. Anything else? Yes, Tom.
Got a question from Miles McLean about the limit straps. If I'm running a sand tire, wheels and tire lighter than stock, are the straps necessarily needed?
So no, I would then say, have you valved it? Because if the rebound speed is faster, then yeah, you would need a strap. If it was stock valving, stock springs, and lighter wheel and tire, then there probably isn't any reason for you to have to do that. One thing though that will tell you if you need it, and that's if you can feel it clunk on extension or if you can hear it in the front. And typically on a UTV in the sand, if you're transitioning from one dune to the next off a lip, you'll hear that first tire drop out off that lip and you can feel it. It's almost like a hammer hitting the chassis in the front. You should know. If you feel that, then you definitely need a strap no matter what you have for wheel tire valving and all that. Mitch.
Speaking of limit straps, PD wants to know, he has a 21 X3 Smart Shock and has our straps on the front. If they are not adjusted properly, will that throw a code on the machine as a suspension fault?
No, absolutely not. Limit straps cannot cause a code on a Smart Shocks vehicle. The only thing that typically is going to do that is a problem with the shock or the wire loom or the connector at the bottom of the shock. A lot of times the pins that are inside there, they're very, very small. And you can put that plug in there and fold one over and that causes that. We've seen loom issues where the plug after the shock goes up the arm to the chassis, right there at that chassis connection. Those things get loose and cause that a lot too. So the way to check that is just unplug them or take that one jumper and take a good one that you know is good by buying it at the dealership, right? And plug it into every single corner till it fixes it.
Speaking of Smart Shocks,
yes.
What would you recommend as far as shock work if you have a Smart Shocks?
Oh, wow. Well, first we would normally ask you what you're doing with it, how you're driving it, where you're driving it. If you're driving super slow and trails and stuff, maybe there isn't anything that we would recommend doing other than making it a whole lot more plush so you don't feel any of the rocks and the chatter. And we have new trail specs for those types of drivers and those terrains, especially because of what we've learned and been able to test with our customers on North Carolina and on the East Coast and a new location out there. So trail spec would be a good one if you drive slow. If you drive fast, usually a Smart Shocks vehicle can really step up how it rides if we do the internal work, if we also do the spring kit, because even though the factory springs are dual rate, they tend to sag, settle. You have to keep up on that preload. You add accessories to it, and then the springs are not good enough and the ride quality goes away. So dual rate spring kit, shock internals would be the start on an X3. I would say front sway bar would be next if it's a four-seater, in my opinion, unless it's a trail car.
Tie rods.
Tie rods, Yeah, with BSD. We got a pile of stuff. Sorry, but what do you have to have? I would start with spring kit, and I would start with the internals. Then go one step after that, on from there. Steve.
Justin, are we going to make a Can-Am X3 rear pull plate? Because we have them for the Pro R, right?
Funny that you ask, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Mitch, do you have a sample you could show? Probably not.
I don't think I have it over here.
But they are being machined. Yeah. So the one that we dropped for the Pro R is just the first. The next one, I believe, is the X3, as you mentioned. Then we've got Turbo S and normal XPs and all that coming as well. Steve.
Are you ever going to make an X3 front sway bar again? We never stopped. So, yeah, we have them. What's the website, John?
shocktherapyusa.com.
Thank you.
All right. So we have them. The only one we don't have for an X3 is going to be a Mav R. We don't have anything yet, and a DS. We only sell links for a DS. People ask why, because it is actually the same sway bar for the DS and the RS. Well, the sway bar does fit, yes, but the mounts for the links on the arm are much farther in a different spot, and you can't actually get a link to fit with the standard sway bar we make, or even the stock one, to cycle on the angles that are there. So if you're willing to weld 2 tabs to your arm, then you could buy the RS sway bar that we have and everything will work. But most people won't do that. Mitch.
Random question. I have your springs, but want internals done. How much, and do you need to make an appointment? Well, we need to know what car you have to tell you how much, and then, yes, you do need to make an appointment if you are doing internal work on your shocks.
Mitch, what's the range
You are
of internals?
750 to 1150, depending on the car.
If, for instance, if you have bypass tubes, that would be the extra cost.
Correct.
Thank you, Mitch. Other stuff on the list over here for things that cause breakage. Too much valving causing overpressurization and body explosions. Also other things that explode on that. This is not one that exploded, but this whole bridge can actually balloon with too much pressure if you do that. So we've seen those on walkers, especially 900s, older ones. Car crashes, kind of obvious, right? If you crash the thing, you're starting to start bending some stuff, and then you possibly lose some shocks. Well, usually what happens in car crashes is you start snapping loops off. This would be the loop on the bottom of the shock right here. So since that was connected to a control arm or a trailing arm that got bent, and usually these get snapped off pretty quick, the next thing that happens is you start bending shafts. Here's a bent one over here. There's a bent rear. It's pretty hard to do. If I roll this around, you can kind of see it a little bit. Bent rear shaft typically is going to be car crash and or rear radius rods failed and the whole trailing arm bent sideways and it bent that. Here's a bent front. Fronts are actually pretty easy to do, just depends. If you wreck the car, then obviously it's going to start bending parts. But since the front shafts, like on walkers, are much smaller in diameter, they're not as strong. So if you hit something real hard and pressurize that shock and the shaft is extended, typically they're going to bend. That would be like jumping the car, arms are all the way out, shafts all the way extended, there's not much support on it right there, and you hit it super hard, super fast on a big landing, it can bend the shaft. There was a picture you had on our ad, actually, with springs and everything, that whole thing bent over. Do you still have that one?
Let me get to that, but
Okay,
hold
thanks.
on a minute.
So-
Talk about something else.
So land it from 3 stories in the air, you're going to break some parts and the shocks are probably going to be on that list. One other thing too that you want to think about this, because we've had guys come in here with the shock having the shaft pulled all the way out of it, right? And the guy says, hey, the shaft came out and that caused me to wreck my car. Okay, cool, that's plausible, but we talked to the friends and the guys that were with him in the ride and find out that he wrecked the car and it pulled the shaft apart. How do you pull the shaft out of the shock by wrecking a car? Well, if it rolls sideways and the rear tire comes over this way and back onto the ground, it's pushing that tire all the way out with the whole force and weight of the vehicle trying to yank the wheel and tire down, which typically is going to pull the shaft apart. It's going to pull the nut off or snap the top of the shaft off, and it pulls it apart. I mean, I've done it wrecking and racing, and I've done it with limit straps on the car. So the forces there are so strong if you roll a car sideways that way to pull the shock apart that they'll pull past the strap strength and yank the shock apart. So that's pretty common if you roll it that way. Steve? No?
I mean, it's a good question, but no. Can we pay extra to have your powder coat guy run a set in black dual rate springs?
We will give you our powder coat guy's phone number, but we will not be involved in any of that. We do not get in the middle of any of that. Another thing about powder coat too, if it comes back wrong color, you own the springs, man. That's on you. It's not on us. We try to stay out of it. There are a lot of reasons. We tried a million ways of doing that, and none of it works out. Mitch, did you have something, bud?
Just some more random stuff.
Sure. What do you got?
So if I was to use a set of Fox factory shocks on a vehicle twice the weight than intended for, is there anything I need to take into account other than changing the springs?
I was going to say springs are number one, but more than likely you're going to end up changing the valving no matter what. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to get stiffer, because if you take it off a vehicle with certain geometry, you might put it on another one with different geometry, and it might actually act stiffer and not need more valving. So it could go both ways on that, but definitely spring. Oh, more? Steve?
Does alcohol tend to create shock failure? Yes. Yes, it does.
100%. I've seen a lot of hold my beer moments that wreck some stuff. Worn out components on the inside. Let's say you got 5,000 miles on the shocks. Let's say that they've been leaking for a while and you just didn't feel like bringing it in and having anything done. There's oil all over the shaft and you still put another 2,000 miles on the thing. Now that oil goes away and all of a sudden starts drying up and you're thinking you're good to go. Well, it's not good to go. It's that you've completely emptied the shock of all oil and now it's not going to leak anymore because there's no oil left. We see that all the time. Guys drive it that way because they're driving slow. They may not realize what a big difference there is between, you know, a completely non-functioning shock and a really plush riding shock. I know it's hard to say that, but it's true. So they come in and all the oil's missing and they've been driving on it for 1,000 miles. Well, when we take the shock apart, the inside of that's been running with no oil for a long time and everything on the inside is destroyed. So you've got piston wear, you got piston wear band, you got body wear, every seal in it smoke, probably takes shaft out, all kinds of parts. So don't let rebuilds go too long. You want to make sure you do them every 2,500 to 3,500 miles. And if you can't do them regularly like that, then as soon as you see anything leaking like a main shaft or something like that, then definitely bring it in and get it done. Don't let them go too far. It causes way more money in part wear. John.
We've also posted some videos of blown seals where there's no visible sign of anything leaking on the outside. So just because it's not leaking externally doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay attention to your shock
A
rebuilds.
really, really good point, John, because you could have a blown out shock internally and not see it. What you will find, though, is ride quality changes completely. When the inside of the shock blows like that, typically it's going to get really stiff in the little stuff because nitrogen is in the wrong spot of the shock, not in the reservoir anymore, and it's also going to blow right through it and bottom out really easy. So stiff in the little stuff, soft in the big stuff, that's the sign of the inside of the shock being internally blown. Mitch.
I actually get this question a lot too, but do I need limit straps on the front and back or just on the front?
I'll let you go with that one. I mean, we used to say front only, and now not so much, right? And it just depends on what you're doing and how heavy a stuff is, but go ahead.
Yeah, fronts are always the ones that you'll get the clunk out of.
First,
You'll hear the
anyway.
clunk first, so always recommend the front just to cure that. As time goes on, the rear can have problems. You obviously save axle life by doing straps too. You save wearing parts. You can kind of save yourself some money in the long run if you do it at the same time. So, but fronts are always first. Definitely recommend doing them all if you can. But to eliminate the clunk and to save the front shocks, fronts are going to be better off to start.
I'll give you like an example of something that I've run into on the race car stuff with an X3. So the front shocks clunk, you can hear them. The rear shocks don't, well, they clunk, they extend and they go all the way out and they go metal to metal, but they slow down enough to where you don't hear it and feel it so drastically, so you don't realize the back ones are doing that. Well, we let the shafts go in the back of the race car for a full season, and then the next race the next season, we end up breaking a rear shaft at the piston as if it was pulled off. Put a shaft in that one, and the opposite shock, we broke the shaft on that the very next race. So there clearly is an amount of time and amount of cycles that the shafts will put up with. Even if you can't hear it clunking, it probably is in the rear, and it just takes a lot longer to rear its ugly head. Plus, racing puts more abuse on things than driving for fun. So us taking 1 year to do it might take a normal guy 2 or 3 years to cause that problem. But we used to say don't worry about the rear because you can't hear it. I would suggest the rear is way more than we've ever done in the past.
It's also like rear turbo S, the older style bodies too, where they would actually split and they would pull the shock apart.
You got a really good point. Let me see if I don't have exactly that, but okay. So what happens on the earlier ones is wrong end.
No,
There it is.
It was
Right.
threaded all the way down before.
So this lip on the inside of this shock, okay, that makes a really thin spot right on this where my thumb is. That thin spot is where these like to break, as if when this extends and that piston comes out and smacks against that seal cap, it goes bang, banging on it. Instead of pulling the shaft apart, it would pull this whole body and crack it and pull it all the way out, just because there was a weak spot. Now they changed it. They actually made a running change through production on that to fix it, but that's another place that things can break. Here's another one. This is the top of a 2.5 or 2-inch shock, right? I don't know if you can see it. I'll try and roll it around. But can you see that little lip just inside right by the shadow right there? There's a little bit of a fold. What that is, that's a crack right there in that thread that was leaking fluid out underneath the top cap of the shock. The only reason that's cracked is because this is getting pulled on and trying to get pulled apart every time that shock extends and goes to clunk. It's failing other components throughout the whole shock, not just the shaft. So be careful when you're not running straps on stuff and you're running it in a decent pace and through the whoops and the tires are off the ground. Thumb.
Bruce Keeler has our spring kit on the R-Max 4-seater and loves them. How much does the valving actually make?
A difference. Oh, it's huge. If on an R-Max, the spring kit probably improves the ride quality 30% better, and if you like that, then you would love the internals because the internals are going to make a 50% change, giving you an overall like spring and internals of a 70% change over. And that's just kind of round numbers, but it's big. It's a bigger change on the internals than it is on the spring kit. So we try to push internals because it makes a giant change that people understand and feel and makes happy customers. So, Dom.
Patrick Winkler, what is the impact on your shocks when you run out of talent when driving your car?
Yeah, explosive impact, I would say, Patrick, for sure. There you go. So this was probably a lack of talent. And the reason I'm saying that is because the shaft is bent in two places. And typically when that happens, that's not, I can see the lower loop is still on it. That means that the radius rods didn't snap off and fold the shock over. That means that this had that problem from a jump landing. That was air time and landed it and bent the shaft because the shaft speed was too high. So perfect example of lack of talent costs you money on shocks. It probably cost them a lot more than that on the car. I'm guessing it was pretty smashed up. Mitch.
J Hubs wants to know what year Turbo S did they change the shock body? I believe it was 2020. It was like halfway through 2020.
Yeah, and then some 2019s we would run into one had a 2019, one had a 2020 body, depending on where
You can tell by if the body is threaded completely down. That is the older style body. If the body is threaded about halfway down, you'll notice that it's a thicker body. That is the new updated version of that.
Just like this one. So this is the updated one where it's not threaded all the way to the bottom of the shock. This shaft would be coming out this end. It's only threaded halfway, so that's the new one. If this is threaded all the way down, it's the old one.
Correct.
Awesome. If you got an old one, bring it in. Let's update the body because those things are definitely weak on the extension side of things. Another thing that causes shock issues is chassis clearance. What I mean by that is if you take a right side shock with clocked, let's say a clocked reservoir, and you put it on the wrong side, then the reservoir is probably going to hit something when you go and hit the next bump. Upper control arms can come up and hit reservoirs and bend the resi out of the way or blow them right off. You can, in the rear, if you swap them over, then the resi is going to run into the chassis or run into the fender. If you've got aftermarket arms, sometimes the lower mounts on the shock are not as wide or in the same place, or the tab is not as nice and radiused and fully compressed. They can fold the lower ends. Seen a lot of little things like that, but that's not the shock's fault. I mean, pretty much none of the stuff we've talked about is the shock's fault. It's all something else that's creating it, but I'll be on the lookout for that. The one thing we haven't talked about also, skipping chassis clearance, is body wear. So one thing that can cause a lot of damage is if, when you've got a slider, so here's a spring divider, and this is a stock one, really thin, kind of too much gap. We supply spring dividers on all the shocks that require it with our spring kits, which is a thicker divider, a higher tolerance, so it doesn't walk around like this one. This body damage that's on this is standard spring, standard divider wear that we see with stock stuff, especially if you're in an environment that's very sandy, environment that's very muddy, and you don't clean the shocks. Because that sand and that mud is inside here. It's just like a grinder or sandpaper the whole time, and these are aluminum bodies. So you're gonna see wear if you've got dirt and you don't clean it. So keep clean shocks and the life of them will last much, much longer. Also, higher quality dividers that we supply with our spring kits cure anything else. So keep that in mind. Always watch your stuff. We get cars in here all the time that are horribly dirty and we gotta clean everything off of them. So, you know, I'm lazy too. I don't clean the car half the time, but we really should. Steve, you got anything?
Elroy, John keeps nudging me over here. Elroy wants to know, can we set his ride height in Glamis? Yes, come on by the tent and we will set your ride height for you. But we got to have a slab, an open spot, but we can help you out. Yeah, come by.
Mitch, what do you got?
Dom's got a question for you, Steve. Here you go.
How much improvement will springs and valving help the Honda Talon?
It would help out tremendously. No, it's going to help out a lot. Just kind of like what Justin was piggybacking on. Just doing the spring kit, giving you that ride height, helping you out there. I mean, percents are opinions, right? So, I mean, you get 30% change there. Doing the valving gives you a lot more. So, yeah.
You know what? I'm going to go a little further on the Honda.
Which Honda too? Because
it does depend on which
so
one.
it depends on the X or the R.
But
So
like an R, 2-seat R, that is like one of the stiffest riding stock vehicles we've ever driven. Stock. And to change the spring and shock internals, night and day. All of a sudden, the suspension actually works. It moves. It's plush. It doesn't hurt you. Then you can enjoy that nice trans in a Honda. So a huge change, I would suggest. Mitch.
Justin, do we do rebuilds on Walker Evans shocks?
Mitch, absolutely we do. Tell them all about it.
Yes.
Yes. Lots.
Yes, we do. Lots of them.
Lots and lots and lots.
All day long.
All day.
Yeah.
John, what shocks do we service?
yeah, John, what shocks do we service?
Lots.
Brand
There's
specific.
there's Walker Evans and Fox, of course, all day long, but Brandon sees all kinds of stuff over there.
How about Kings, Bilstein, Elka,
Stein.
ADS, Stein, sorry. ABS, right? ADS. Who else? There's a couple others. Icon. A lot of truck shocks that we get through here too. So pretty much the list goes on and on. There isn't a shock that we don't touch. There are some that are harder and take longer for us to do because, like for instance, with an Elka, we have to get the parts from them in Canada typically because you can't stock everything from Elka, honestly. There's so many different ones that fit all those shocks. So that one takes a little bit longer. But other than that,
Best to call and talk to those guys and make sure we can handle them before you just package them up and ship them in.
yeah, just don't send them. But that kind of stuff, we're pretty much doing them all. Easy. Steve.
I've got a question. J-Hubs 24. How many miles can you get out of a typical Fox shock body?
Well, it depends on your area, because if you live in Louisiana and you're constantly in the mud, it's going to wear the shock body out a lot faster than the guy that's maybe in Colorado and only sees snow. So it's all about how much dirt is inside that body to divider clearance area and how much sandpaper that's creating. That's the main issue.
Some of the newer Fox shocks on some cars
have stainless liners on them. Good point. So like on a Pro R or early KRX, and now on the Maverick R, Foxes have a stainless liner on the outside of it. So basically the body's not going to have a wear out problem ever, pretty much. Unless you wreck it or run out of talent like Patrick said, which we see a lot. Dom, anything? Mitch, you good? Steve?
I see front shocks flipped upside down on X3s. Does that affect the performance of the shock? I don't know if I've ever seen them flipped upside down, but the shock doesn't matter.
They're flipped inside out, right? With the reservoir from the factory position on the inside, flipping them to the outside.
I hope that's what it is.
Yeah, because okay, I'll do both. If you flip them around resi-wise or shock left to right, okay, it's not going to change jack, but everybody thinks that it's going to run cooler because the reservoir's out here. It doesn't. We've done testing. It doesn't matter. But if you like the look, do it. If you take the shocks and flip them upside down, like you said, it won't change anything on the shock function because you've got a reservoir which separates the oil, so there's no issue with like gas on one end of the shock or the other. I know for a fact that will not.
I don't even think it would clear.
You can't run a reservoir on the bottom end and have it clear, I don't think. I'd like to see a picture if that's what you actually
rear,
meant.
we've done it on an Evo car.
Yeah, we've run shocks
We've
upside
run
down.
shocks on an Evo car.
So on Evo's drag car that set some world records, we actually made kind of Frankenstein a early Wildcat shock with a different shaft and a smart valve on the inside and a Fox live valve on the outside. Ran them upside down on that drag car, set records. So you can do all kinds of upside down stuff if it'll clear. Mitch.
Let's see. Do you guys have limit straps for the Maverick Sport / Commander Limited? At this time, we do not.
What stops you from doing that, Mitch? Do you remember?
I think it could have been a clearance issue on the Maverick Sport. I think we were looking for getting a Commander, right? Yeah. There's some issues with that, but we were waiting on a Commander. I think we were looking for one still to figure out some shock stuff. If we get one, then we can dive into that and see if it actually works. If it works, then we'll have it.
XT or a DPS Commander. If anybody local has one, hit us up.
Yeah. So kind of just more testing and cycling to make sure that it works. So.
Cool. Well, I kind of ran through all the list of things that I've got, except for one, which is hard to see on the video, but I'll pull it out anyway. It is shaft pitting. It's probably on this shaft over here. But so very hard to see, but we circled that. I don't know if I got the glare just right. Right there's a good spot. So on this shaft, circled in Sharpie, there's a dent. You can feel it with a fingernail. That dent, that pitting, will end up taking out the shaft seal when this compresses and goes by the shaft, by the seal. So that probably came from a rock hitting that this way when the shaft was exposed. This is why we have rock guards. This is why we have our seal savers. That stops that kind of damage into the shaft, which then causes a leak and then causes you need a rebuild and a new shaft. We see a lot of that on the bottom of these in shocks that hang out on the East Coast. This one doesn't have pitting, right? But imagine this bump stop sitting on the bottom of the shock its whole life, and the bump stop is soaked with salty water and salty mud. So what happens when we pull the shaft, the bump stop, up off the shaft, that shaft exposed on the bottom is full of pits. It's rusted and all kinds of damage on the inside of that. That ends up, when you bottom out, this compresses, those pits go through the seal and it blows it out. So cleaning your shock is the only way to stay away from rust pits in the shafts. So keep everything clean. It'll help you with body wear. It'll help shaft issues and seal issues in the long run. Run limit straps on your shock. Any chance you can, it's going to stop a lot of potential damage, especially if you're running wheels and tire packages, anything that's heavier than stock or different spring kits or different valving. Other things, lower forks for Pro Rs to prevent some shaft damage if you run into other issues like ball joints on your car. And try not to wreck your car. It'll wreck the shocks too. I think that kind of goes without saying. Steve or anybody else, you got any more questions? John,
No, John, you don't have the mic. I do. I have the mic, John. Questions for you, John. How are 35s on a Can-Am Maverick R?
Tight. Good and tight.
as the Germans say. Well,
Depends on your 35.
You also have different air in there.
I've got California air, and it's a little overinflated, just like the rest of California. So a true 35-inch is really tight to that upper control arm.
yeah, we've got 35s on our car, and they're about an inch shorter than the ones.
That's more
that
like a 34.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
wow.
usually. It's the next number on the list. Thank you, John. But those tires clear just fine on our Maverick car, so it just depends. Get out the tape measure and figure it out.
All right.
It's pretty good, John. I like it.
So if someone is going to do valving and they want to do rebuilds, do we offer any sort of discount on that package as long as we're in the shock?
Well, since rebalds don't exist, then yeah, they're free. So super discount on those.
Need Heim's joints replacement for my BSD. Can't find them on the website. They're on the website. Just don't do Heim's joints. Just
Nope.
do Heim joint.
Or rod
And
end.
you'll find it. Yeah, rod end. I believe they're under rod end. And we do have those on the website.
Not to be an old man and correct everybody, but a Heim joint is the name of the company that actually made the first ones prior to World War II. German, hence the name Heim. And everybody's kind of run with that on all the joints. Technically, they're a rod end, and if they were still made by Heim, then there would be a rod end made by the Heim Corporation. There you go. Yes, Germans.
Yeah. Bilstein.
Yes, Bill Stein.
Stein.
Steve.
Yes. One more question, Justin. I just lost it. Will there be options to tune Smart Shocks on Can-Am? They are nice, but they do need tuning. Thanks, Tabby.
Well, I'm sorry, I missed it. I was completely distracted by the
Another
darkness.
question on Smart Shocks, tuning Smart Shocks.
Go for it. You answer it.
Yeah, we answer, yeah, yes. Yes, we have valving, we have springs. There's a couple tunes we can do. We just need to know your riding style, how many passengers you have, springs, everything like that. So, yeah.
Any live valve shock.
Any live valve shock, yes.
As always, John, thank you very much for jumping in and helping us. It was incredible having you as a guest. And Steve.
Premature John.
Steve, would love to have you take us out since everybody's out of questions and we've done our part on telling you how stuff can break and how to fix it. We've got lots of fixes. #1 limit straps, so give us a call. Save your shocks with those. Steve, what do you got to tell them?
If you're looking to buy anything from us, visit our website, www.shocktherapeusa.com, or call us 623-217-4959. Dude,
That's pretty quick.
I'm hired.
That was pretty quick, man.